Hello and welcome to Chapter 10 of Government and Nonprofit Accounting. In Chapter 10, we are going to talk about financial statement analysis. So, looking at government financial reporting, which we discussed in Chapter 9, the types of reports that governments are required to put out, and financial transparency. So for a long time, many people have felt that governments are lacking transparency in how they spend the money that they collect from taxes and users of services. Financial transparency is important to people who are citizens within the government, but it's also important to people outside of the government who might be purchasing bonds as investment accounts, state governments who might be looking to provide money in the form of grants or opportunities, and anyone who might be interested in the financial performance of a government. Okay, GASB has created two informational packets, one for citizens called What You Should Know About Your Local Government's Finances, to help citizens to understand what financial statements are saying about governmental performance. The second guide that they made is called an analyst guide to government financial statements. And this guide is for financial analysts to use and to determine if city governments and their bonds are good investments or not. When looking at the things that GASB measures, the accountability tools, we have one is the financial position. So this is really looking at how much cash do we have available on hand. So do we have enough cash to cover a certain number of days? Do we have enough cash to pay our liabilities that are due? Then we have our financial condition. This is a combination of the willingness and capacity to meet financial and service obligations. So you remember that when you're a governmental entity, it's not just about making sure that your bills are paid and the lights are still on. We also have service obligations to our citizens, things like having well-maintained parks, clean streets, low litter downtown areas, working traffic lights. So can we maintain those service obligations that are part of our governmental obligation to our citizens? And then we have the economic condition. There are various factors in the economic condition, which is really also looking at what is our financial position, what's our ability and willingness to meet obligations, and what are our service commitments on an ongoing basis. So thinking about how do we serve our citizens and can we do it for a period of time in the foreseeable future. And there are a lot of different factors that go into these different things. So let's talk a little bit more about economic condition. Remember that financial position, financial capacity, and service capacity are all a part of the city's overall economic condition. Different things that we might be looking at can be different. So for example, when we look here, we have the financial trend monitoring system. So this financial trend monitoring system was developed by the ICMA, and it looks for financial performance of governments. So it's a tool that we can use to track and determine how well we are performing. And the factors of financial performance that that organization looks at are environmental, organizational, and financial. The environmental factors are what are our community needs and resources. What's the average age of our community? What are the needs of our community members based on their age? What's our home ownership rates? What's our percentage of people living in homes that they own versus rentals? How many of our homes are sitting empty with no one living in them? Do we have enough space for the people that we have, or do we have a really high population density and we have no home vacancies? What is our crime rate, our percentage of employment? What's our property value and distribution? Do we have property values that range from really low to really high? Do we have obvious areas when you drive around the city of low value, low income housing that is in disrepair? All of those different factors go into environmental factors. Okay. Other environmental factors look at things like, what are our intergovernmental constraints? So if we're a city government, what constraints do we have that are imposed upon us by the county, the state, and the federal government? Same thing. If we're a state government, what are we constrained by the federal government? Okay, for example, I know we've talked about our city before, that the road that runs straight through the middle of town is a state highway. And so even though it's the main city road that is used, it's our main street, it runs right through the middle of the city, it's also a state highway. And we're, as a city government, we don't really get to make decisions about how that road is maintained, what happens to that road, when that road gets serviced. That's all done on a state basis. Okay, then we also have disaster risks. What is our potential for natural disasters, and how well prepared are we? Of course, we also know that we have a major river here, and in the last 50 years, we have had 2 major city-destroying, devastating floods. Okay, so we have actually really high local preparedness. We have a certification system that college students and citizens that can go through for flood emergency management. Okay, also, what's our political culture? What's our attitude towards taxes, services, towards the process? As I was saying again about that state highway, many citizens were so upset about some changes that the state made to the highway that they actually voted to overhaul the entire city government. They removed the mayor and the entire city council because they blamed them for not stopping the state making changes to the road that ran through the middle of town. So there was a large political culture around that situation. They had local businesses were taking collections of names to petition the state government to change the road back. So different things like that. And then we also have other economic conditions, such as how are we being impacted by inflation? What are the businesses available to us for purchasing power? What's our employment rate? Where are there for people to work? Do we have places of business here within town where people can work, or do most of the people commute to a local city in order to work? Then we have financial factors. So both in our revenues and our expenditures. Are we growing as a city? We build more houses and our tax revenues go up. Okay, and so how are we maintaining growth? How do we run our city? How much do we depend on those revenues? Are we spending to the limit every single year? Are we running into budget deficits and budget crises? What's the diversity within our city? And expenditures. What are we putting our priorities on? How do we determine what we spend our money on? What kind of projects we move to and stuff. We've talked about in class also about not having a local pool for the last 2 years because an inspection found the pool structurally unsound and the city did not have the funding for it. Ultimately, there was a bond issue that got put on the ballot and passed to supplement a new city pool. That is currently under construction, but whether or not it will be ready for this summer, it remains to be seen. So different financial factors that we might be looking. So what is our operating position? What's our current fund balances? How much do we have in reserves? What are our pension obligations? We talked about pensions a couple of weeks ago and how cities need to maintain information about their pension obligations and need to have a debt service fund structured towards collecting money for those pensions. We also have what's the condition of our physical infrastructure. How is it maintained? Do we have heavy deferred maintenance? So high amounts of deferred maintenance actually show financial distress because we're short funding for maintenance of buildings, and that's an easy way to save money, is to defer it to another year. And then what's our debt structure? What kind of debt do we have? How much debt do we have? When do we have to pay that debt back? How much of our tax revenue are we using, or is it special interest revenue? What does that debt serve? We analyze our fund financial statement using financial ratios. So we have different debt ratios, capital plant ratios, operating position measures, expenditures, and revenues. As you can see, this is similar to financial statement analysis for a business entity. A little bit different because we're looking also at service of citizens. So we have a little bit different purpose for existing with a governmental entity than a business entity. When we're looking at financial ratios, we want to have a 5 to 10 year timeline and within the same government. So when we're looking at these ratios where we're looking at operating revenues to population, we want to be looking at the same government's information for that. Okay. However, when we're benchmarking, we can compare to other governments. What a benchmark is, again, this is just like when we do financial statement analysis for business accounting. We're looking at, one, what was our goal? What is the normal industry performance? So where do we see warning signs? Where do we see extreme fluctuations? How do we compare to our prior performance? And how do we compare to other governments that are like us, similar size, similar makeup of citizenship? Then we have the bond rating agencies. So Standard & Poor's, Moody's, Fitch, KRA, that take all of our financial information about our debt service, and they give ratings about how good of an investment our municipal bonds are. We've talked throughout several chapters about how governmental entities use governmental bonds to fund projects, projects that they don't have enough property tax income for. Those bond ratings then, of course, we want to have the highest possible bond rating, which would be you know, in the A's. We've talked about some local governments that were actually in the B's for bond rating, and so those bonds are a bit more riskier than AAA rated bonds. Okay, and that is all of chapter 10. So chapter 10 is just really looking at financial statement analysis and how different groups use financial statement information to assess the financial health of a governmental entity. In the chapter 10 examples, we're going to be looking at preparing some of those financial ratios and talking about what they're telling us about the government's performance.